Yeah. Welcome to Island Living Today. This is a monthly series with the goal of helping you live with greater ease and joy on Vancouver Island. On the first Wednesday of each month, we invite different local experts to share insider tips for homeowners and answer any of your burning questions about buying, selling, or moving homes. So, again, my name is Megan. I am a local realtor on Vancouver Island, based out of Nanaimo, BC. I first started in the industry in 2018. I started as a conveyancer for Royal LePage. Then I moved on to working in different notary offices and eventually went off as a solo real estate agent. I primarily focus on rural properties, farms and acreages, but I help all sorts of different clientele. And my passion is definitely for side hobbies, gardening, and getting outdoors. So this is a great speaker to have for somebody who enjoys gardening. So I guess I will, without further ado, introduce our guest speaker today. So today we have Hunter Jarrett joining us to discuss the topic of cultivating your dream garden by managing invasive species. I actually follow Hunter on Instagram. He has quite an amazing little following there and makes some pretty fantastic videos on various different topics. Um, Hunter is an environmental educator and invasive species specialist. He is deeply committed to environmental protection. Hunter pursues a bachelor's degree in natural resource protection at Vancouver Island University and has worked with the Invasive Species Council of British Columbia and the Coastal Invasive Species Committee. Currently, he is working as a restoration consultation for Kiki Nursery in Ladysmith, where he has begun a project returning farmland back into a Gary Oak ecosystem. Very cool. Through his social media accounts as the invasive species guy, he educates, motivates, and inspires people to get involved with protecting the province's biodiversity.
So Megan, you can admit you're kind of a super fan. You were pretty excited when
I
you
am
found
definitely a
Hunter.
fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very excited when I saw that he was going to be speaking today.
Oh, that's awesome. And for any of you interested, Hunter's Nursery is available by consultation and appointment only, and it's located just past the Nanaimo Airport off of Brenton Page Road. So not a typical nursery that you drive into. So I'm Laura Healy. I'm a local residential real estate agent on Vancouver Island. I am one of the co-hosts along with Denise Hodgkins, who has a very busy schedule today, but she wishes she could be here, and Connie Henschel, who is currently returning next week from a fantastic 3 or 4 week cruise in Europe. So we all need our days off. As a local residential real estate agent, I am fascinated by this topic because many of our properties have invasive species, but we don't always know the depth of what's involved. And unlike Megan, I don't have a green thumb, but I definitely appreciate a beautiful garden and tend to have I tend to have a taste for natural items. I told Hunter my favorite plant is like basically ferns. I just absolutely can't get enough of ferns. Those I don't seem to kill too badly. So I am pretty excited to be on this call with Hunter. And so we are going to get to learn some great things today, Hunter. Are you ready to kick it off?
I sure am.
Awesome.
Right.
So Megan's done a great intro for you. So tell us, let's start off with our first question. What are invasive species and what's the big deal about them, Hunter?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's easy to understand what an invasive species is by understanding how we can broadly classify species in a province, whether that's like a plant or an animal, an insect, mosses, lichens, all this kind of stuff. Each of these different organisms has an origin status. And so what that refers to is basically where it's geographically and ecologically where it's from. And so kind of have two main categories. We have native plants and non-native or introduced plants. I'm going to say plants a lot because that's kind of where I'm coming from with this, but you can apply this concept to many things. So, for example, non-native species, those are species that did not evolve here, and they have been introduced by people deliberately, accidentally. There's many different ways that a species can be introduced, especially in today's day and age. So the terms non-native, exotic, introduced, they all kind of mean the same thing. It's
You
the
mean like
species.
broom?
Yes, broom is a non-native species. um, and then, of course, there's native species which have naturally evolved here over time. There's, they're integrated into our ecosystems here. There's complex relationships there. Other organisms are depending on those organisms, and so they're very much in place. They're supposed to be here. And then, of course, invasive species. It's not an origin status, but it's a label that we slap onto in to non-native species that are having unintended negative impacts on uh, human health, the environment, the economy, um, these kind of things. And the impacts can be very little. They can be very very impactful, and often there's a number of impacts that one species can be causing.
Can you give us
Um,
some examples of those?
yeah,
The
so like as
common
you mentioned
ones on
before,
Vancouver Island that you're dealing with.
yeah, yeah. So like one of the most well-known examples is Scotch broom, and so that is the yellow shrub that's blooming all over our roadways and highways right now. A lot of people are allergic to it, so that kind of touches on the human health impacts there. It also Scotch broom is a great example because it clicks all the boxes. So environmentally, it is the number one invasive species causing the most harm to species at risk in our province. So when I say species at risk of going extinct or leading to extirpation events and this kind of thing. And so yeah, so Scotch broom overshadows and outcompetes a lot of our smaller wildflowers and this kind of thing. It renders farmland useless. It hinders reforestation efforts, for example, changes the soil's chemistry, reproduces rapidly. Thousands of seeds per plant that can remain viable in the ground for decades. There's all sorts. People will give you all sorts of numbers. They'll say Scotch broom seeds can last in the ground for uh, 20 years. I've heard over
Wow.
100 years. Yeah. We'll just say decades. It's a very long time.
I just
And
envision somebody creating some type of machine that runs along the highway that can cut all of this with some blade, and they would make so much money. Like, I'm like, why isn't this done? But I know it's more than just cut broom and bloom, right? Like, I know on our prep call, we were talking about where the heck do you take this broom once you've cut it. So that's a totally different topic onto itself. Yeah.
yeah,
What
no,
other
exactly.
species are you dealing with?
What other species?
Yeah.
Another great one is English ivy. And so in our more densely forested, shaded areas, but also um, very common, like in urbanized areas. It is this climbing vine, and it can climb up trees and block sunlight from reaching branches. The overall weight of the vines after many years of growth can actually lead to it makes trees more susceptible to windfall and disease and this kind of thing. It basically creates monocultures. And so it's also one that is incredibly hard to get rid of. You have to basically rip all them out. And
Is
yeah,
that the one that goes like wraps around that has the green soft leaf on it?
yes, yeah, correct.
Oh, yeah.
There's English ivy, but there's also there's other forms of ivy too, like Boston ivy, but generally we just say ivy or English ivy, and it kind of everything falls underneath that umbrella. Um, but yeah, it is one that is continuously introduced to our landscape, usually by people who are not aware of the impacts that they cause because it is available at most commercial retailers still, um, despite being one of the worst invasive species on Vancouver Island.
Okay. Really interesting. I had no idea. I mean, I don't personally like the texture of it, so I wouldn't plant it. But I can see how for privacy, people would want to find something that could provide privacy,
Yep.
because they're thinking, okay, great, I have this fence, I wanted to make it look more natural, or I have this concrete wall, I can create a creepy thing up it. But I know, it rots the wood, it does damages, like all
Yeah.
those things, right? I mean,
No, exactly.
it definitely creates privacy, but then there's obviously a side, a disadvantage to that.
Exactly. And it's often those characteristics which are like great for they're used as marketing for these species, like great ground cover, spreads rapidly. But if we think of them in the context of invasion ecology, they're really not great traits for our communities and our local environments.
So just like grocery stores, read the plant label.
If there is one, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So moving on to our next question,
Yeah.
why should homeowners care about invasive species? You briefly touched on it, but why should they care?
Right. So everywhere that we live has vegetation growing, even if you live in a massive skyrise. There'll be an entrance to your building, and chances are there's a vegetation growing there, and they're probably non-native vegetation or weedy species and this kind of thing. But when I walk down my neighborhood in Nanaimo, for example, there's invasive species everywhere, and once you notice them, you'll never be able to not see them anymore. I call it the curse. But for example, English hawthorn is like the scrub that can get very big, like trees, and same with English holly. This is a species that is also continuously uh, reintroduced to our landscape. It's a Christmas decoration. It's grown commercially for Christmas ornaments and decorations and things. But people think they're beautiful. Often they'll just show up, right? And so people will then start to meticulously maintain them. But when we allow them to continue to grow and develop and produce berries and seeds, our properties then act as major pathways for these invasive species to spread into our local parks and natural areas, and especially in more urbanized areas. Our natural areas, if there are any left, are already under an enormous amount of pressure, and so it just adds another one. So by controlling invasive species, you are really helping your community. You're preventing new invasive species from establishing themselves in local natural areas. You're helping biodiversity. So yeah, just
So
by
when you
managing the invasives, you make a really big impact.
so when you do your walk around, what are like the top 5 plants you see when you go for your walk in your area?
Yeah, so I mean, Scotch broom, English ivy, uh, English hawthorn, um, English holly, there, there's so many. There's yellow archangel, bachelor's buttons, foxglove. Like a lot of these are, yeah, quite beautiful as well, right? And so that is why they're there, and people really like them, and they are beautiful, but they have value. Even invasive plants are valued somewhere. They're from somewhere, but they're just not valued the same everywhere. I guess maybe should be valued the same everywhere, especially when we have a lot of our native species here that look or function similarly. And I always tell people that for every invasive species, there is a native or non-native, but not invasive species that looks or functions similarly that it could be replaced with.
That's really, really interesting. So most of us on the call don't have your extensive knowledge. So how can a homeowner find out if something is an invasive species and what do they do with it if it is?
Right. In today's day and age, the easiest way to ID something is to use your phone. There are a lot of different apps and programs to assist with this. The two kind of biggest ones are iNaturalist and Seek. I personally use iNaturalist because it's a bit more complex, I guess. But yeah, you take a picture of it, and it will, using AI, identify that plant for you. And it's not always right, especially as you get to more uncommon or rare species. It does its best, but sometimes it's not always right, and it often will give you a general direction of where to go to ID the plant. So you might have to do a little bit of work, but it points you in the right direction. Like especially all the common plants in urbanized areas. Like it will ID them pretty confidently, and then you can always, once you have a species name, then look it up, for example, to see whether it is invasive. we actually have a provincial, there's a lot of different resources, and I could pop a few in the chat here, but like one is our field guide to noxious weeds. That is, it's a very helpful resource, but it is updated occasionally. So in 2023 is the last update. And inside it has kind of the more important invasive species, we'll say, to keep your eye out for, especially as homeowners. So terrestrial invasive plants that are labeled as noxious weeds by the province are those that are regulated by law. And so it imposes a duty on all landowners to control them on your property. And plants can be regionally noxious. So anybody who lives in this region, or this, you have this plant on your property, you are required to control it. And then if you have, there's also provincially noxious weeds as well. So the whole province, if you have it on your property, then yeah, you are
You have the
allowed.
social duty to remove it, I guess. I don't know if anyone mandates it, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it's definitely more of a social duty. I haven't heard of too many examples where that was actually enforced, but I know that some provinces, I believe even ours as well, have weed officers. I've never met a weed officer, but under the Weed Control Act, they actually do have the power to come onto your property, remove the plants, and then bill you that. So it's actually a pretty powerful piece of legislation. Although I haven't heard of an example where it's been used.
I
So
think you
yeah.
think you'd get a nice little letter in the mail first saying, we have done a visual inspection and you have an invasive species. Please proceed
Yeah,
in
they were very,
reporting.
it's very much like a, we're gonna work with you on this, and then yeah, usually it gets controlled. So
I found it really interesting how you said sometimes it can render farmland not usable. And I know farmland is so valuable to, you know, our economy, to our island. So I found that really interesting because I just assumed that people were using farmland for the purpose set out and not that the ground could basically have to be kind of recultivated.
yeah, so Scotch broom, yeah, it changes the soil's chemistry, but one of the most difficult things is that Scotch broom loves disturbance, and so that's why it's all over our communities and plagues us. And then kind of, you know, if you go to top blocks, it's going to be there too, because that's obviously a large level of disturbance. But if you go to untouched ecosystems, or maybe not untouched, everything's been touched at this point, but whether it's good,
Less touch, less disturbed.
yeah, less disturbed, then it's usually not there, or maybe not as abundant. So it really loves disturbance. Maybe our more open meadows and stuff, it would be there too. But you know, if a rainforest, for example, it's not going to be there. You know, there's more shade, there's more moisture. It needs that open, sunny disturbance. And you know, when we're farming, we are disturbing the soil. Typical, say, classic farming methods. You know, plowing, tilling, this kind of thing. Uh, if you have Scotch broom and then that happens, you will probably end up with a worse infestation than prior to the plowing or mowing or tilling. So it's really tough. It's really tough at Kiki Nursery. We uh, the nursery is located on farmland, and yeah, all of our fields had Scotch broom on it, and so we have been hard at work to remove it, and there's none that have been allowed to bloom this year. So it's like, yeah, countless hours controlling it, and then you know the seeds last in the ground for so long, it's going to be this constant thing. But our vision for most of it is to restore the land and cultivate native species. So a little bit of a different approach, but if you're like a classic farmer, we'll say it's a really big challenge.
Yeah, yeah, this leads us perfectly into kind of segues into the next question. And that is, how do you manage them as a homeowner? And how do you prevent invasive species? So what are your tips, tricks? Like how do you know, like the person that's the non-green thumb to the farm-focused realtor to the avid gardener, you know, are there certain times a year? Are there certain tools? Are there certain natural products you can use? Like fill us in. What's, you know, how did you get rid of all the broom other than physically pull it out at the right time?
Yeah, so for each invasive species, the methods tend to all be kind of the same. It's like you gotta remove it. But there's tips and tricks kind of for each one. And if you use the same management approach for all of it, chances are for every species, you're going to have varying results here. So it's very much a species by species basis. So for Scotch broom, for example, we know that it loves disturbance. And so when we're removing it, we wouldn't want to rip it out of the ground, although there's a large portion of the population who is very adamant that you have to do that. And while they're right, it will kill that plant. It will also encourage the germination of the likely thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of seeds in the ground. And so you might end up with a worse infestation the following year. And so a great method for Scotch broom, the method that, for example, the Broom Busters encourages people to use is to cut it level with the ground, even like underground if you can, trying to get at least the first lateral root. It'll kill that plant. The soil will remain happy and undisturbed, and then you will still have to monitor for regrowth of seedlings, but yeah, it is a far more effective method. There are a few meadows that I steward in my spare time, and I have probably like 8, 9 times now just gone through and gotten all the seedlings. It takes some time, but as the years go on, there is less and less and less and less and less. And so now a couple of the meadows, they're relatively large, like half a soccer field kind of thing, and
Wow.
get through it in an hour. So it's very can be meticulous and discouraging, but yeah, if you have the right knowledge, then you can definitely make an impact and remove it from your property.
So cut at the root on an angle, like kind of into the ground.
Yeah, yeah.
I would I would love to hear if anyone wants to put in the chat what invasive species they're struggling with on their properties, because we've got basically Hunter in the hot seat. So feel free to add to the chat if there's any invasive species. I know Crystal and Megan. Oh, we got blackberries and bindweed. Ooh, Hunter, take it away again. Fill us in. What do we do?
Bindweed is a very interesting one. It's also a species that is still commercially available, and there are not a whole lot of great solutions for that one, especially because they're usually interweaving themselves with other vegetation that we're trying to protect, and up trellising, and it gets literally crazy. Um, for bindweed, there's something that you almost have to be somewhat like experimental with. You can try pulling it out. Like a lot of species, you can smother with cardboard, for example. So get out as much as you can. Make sure you dispose of all plant pieces and seeds and parts properly, and then you could try like smothering it with cardboard and putting like mulch or even just like woody debris and stuff on top to really like hold it in place. Um,
Interesting.
Blackberry. Yeah, there's all sorts of different methods, right? Um, for blackberries, you have to get the root ball out of the ground. And so, yeah, for a lot of species, there will be some sort of level of disturbance to the soil. It's almost inevitable unless you use like herbicides, for example. So, but for Scotch broom, or sorry, for blackberry, and whether that is cutleaf blackberry or Himalayan blackberry, which are both invasive species, different species of blackberry that are invasive in BC. You have to remove it's kind of a system. So you remove the canes first. And so if you have loppers, you can, cut each stem if you want. Then using leather gloves, you can then bag, dispose of that. If your property is really big, you could also, just let it kind of decompose on site. You could bring it to the dump. There's kind of many different ways you can deal with the canes. I use a hedge trimmer often just to kind of knock them down. You do have to be careful for like watch out for birds nesting and stuff. It's probably not the greatest to do that while they're nesting, but before or after, that's great. And then you have to dig out the root ball, and so the root balls can be quite big, like really big. I've broken countless shovels trying to get them out of the ground. Sometimes like a pickaxe kind of works really great, or like a Pulaski. That works really great. Yeah, and you want to make sure you get as much of that as possible. All the little kind of tendril roots that grow off of those root balls, you want to get those out as well. It's important to get rid of the invasive species, but then when you remove an invasive species, you also have to ask yourself, what am I going to put back in its place? I guess historically there's been general trend to just manage invasive species, remove them, cut them out, dig them out, and that's great, and we should be doing that. but often if you go back to these sites, even the following year, the invasive species have reestablished, and it often looks like nothing was done in the first place. And so they're here for a reason. There might be some level of, usually a level of disturbance involved. And so, yeah, what are we going to replace them with? And kind of like I mentioned before, there are species that function and look similar. A great replacement for Scotch broom on the side of our highways and roadways would be large leaf lupin, which is present and also blooming right now. It's the more purpley blue flower that you see on the sides of the.
That's so pretty. That's so pretty.
Right?
We got a good one in the questions and comments.
Yeah.
What about horsetail, Hunter?
Horse. So that is an interesting one. And
Yeah.
it's one, yeah. So I was actually pulling some of that today in my parents' backyard. It is actually a native species. And so that kind of brings up another great point.
Really?
The true invasive species have to be non-native, like they did not evolve here at all. But there are species that can be maybe annoying to us, or like roses. We have many different species of roses that are native here, and they're pokey, and people might not like them, but they're not invasive, right? And so the term invasive sometimes is used like subjectively, or maybe by people who are less familiar with it. But they're like, it has been made like a very objectable term. We have it's generally accepted. Like we have research and this kind of stuff to back up the impacts that they're causing. But yeah, to be a true invasive species, it has to be non-native. That's not to say that native species can't act invasive under certain contexts. Um, for example, like large portions of Vancouver Island used to be Gary Oak Meadow that were maintained by fire. And so in the absence of fire, a lot of native shrubs will move into these historically open meadows. And so in that context, a lot of them are removed or managed by fire. And so they're actually viewed as invasive species, but they can never be true invasive species. So for horsetail, if it's on your property, you can, I've just pulled them out, but that is a very tough one to get rid of. Yeah, for
There's
removing
no
it.
like solutions like vinegar and water and things like that that will kill them off quicker, or vinegar and baking soda. I don't know. I'm just thinking of things that, like that landscapers have used naturally on my property to kind of subside things growing. Are there any tricks that you suggest other than literally walking around and pulling them out with a cool tool or something? Or are there tools you use so you don't have to bend over and kill your back pulling out horseweed?
Right. For all these like natural remedies and things, the biggest concern is you should be, I guess, concerned about your soil health and what kind of impacts that would cause. But there are many different little tools and things, like any of our like shrubby invasive plants, or even like um, uh, young invasive trees and this kind of thing. Like we have polar bear, I think it's called, and also the extractigator. So it's basically these big, it's like this, it's a big metal pole, and it has this big kind of clampy mouth at the bottom. So you clamp the plant and you pull backwards, and it'll help it bring out of the ground. Um, yeah, there's all sorts of. It depends. It really depends on the species that you're trying to remove, whether it's a shovel or a Pulaski or hedge trimmers, and yeah, like, a little bit
So
of that comes with experience, but there are resources online with like methods that different RESOs, like regional invasive species organizations, are using on various invasive plants.
So in all of your experiences breaking shovels, what's the most durable shovel? What's your favorite one that you haven't seemed to be able to break yet?
Solid metal shovels through and through, connected to the actual part that's doing the shoveling. Any of the ones that have wooden handles, chances are there's a high chance of you breaking it.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. So we briefly touched on it. So we removed the invasive species. Now, what are good alternatives? So we briefly touched on the large leaf lupin. How do we restore our beautiful properties back to something so natural, organic, real, you name it? Tell
Right.
us all about your favorite things you love to replant. And do we
Right.
buy these? Do we, you know, take
Yeah.
some like, seedlings from neighbors? How do we go about it?
Yeah, I mean, if your neighbor has, native plants or something like this, and you're wanting to have it on your own property, like what a great opportunity for talking to your neighbors. Um, yeah, so when you like for me, for example, I you can replant with like the best thing to replant with would be like a native species, but you can also plant non-native species that are just not invasive. It is important to remember that under the right circumstances, any non-native plant could become invasive. And then as our climate and planet is constantly changing right now, it's really important to kind of like keep that in the back of our head. Um, so for me, especially because I'm an ecological restoration consultant, it's like I primarily only really plant native plants. And this does involve a little bit of research if you're a homeowner or at least talking to professionals. Um, because yeah, there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of marketing, I guess, that happens. Like when you walk into big box stores and this kind of thing, you go to their seeds, their seed collection, and it's beautiful, and there's butterflies and bees and all these kind of things all over the packaging, and it's wildflower mix, pollinator mix. Stay away from those. Please stay away from those.
They've
They
never worked for me. I've tried them once or twice, and I lay the fluffy stuff on the ground, and I'm like, I didn't get any results. Is it because I don't have a green thumb? I think I was like, did I buy a package that was a dud? And then I have friends' yards that are perfect. And all I can think of is, and this might lead perfectly to some information from you. Like think back to like my friends who farm, and they talk about the pH balance in the soils. They talk about the direction the property faces. They talk about the acidity, when they get sunlight, when they get shade. I know I had to spend quite a bit of time reading the labels when I replanted my yard because I tend to lean towards an English style garden because I like kind of that low maintenance kind of style. But I also had to realize I had massive cedar trees along one side. So not everything survived. I lost a few plants in the process.
No, exactly. And so knowing your site, the amount of light it receives, the amount of moisture it receives, whether if you have big cedar trees and stuff, you're wanting to plant maybe more shade tolerant species. Um, yeah, so there's a lot that goes into selecting the plants, at least if you're looking through replanting through a native plant lens. Um, yeah, so the reason why the wildflowers, for example, that you purchased might not have done well is the site conditions and these kind of things. But those wildflower mixes, more often than not, contain a majority of non-native plants. So they're not adapted to live here, which is probably why they're not surviving here. And more often than not, they also contain one or more known invasive plants. And we have no provincial legislation banning the sale or trade of invasive species in BC. So with the colorful packaging and the pollinators and all this kind of thing, our collective plant blindness is really taken advantage of. And invasive plants, at least from a commercial viewpoint, are very easy to grow. And so, yeah,
They
so
grow quickly, they spread fast.
yeah, and
Sounds like
so
a great marketing plan, doesn't it?
yeah. So yeah, native plants, like I'll just talk about maybe some of the benefits of them is they're adapted to live here. They've evolved here, so they're familiar with our weather and our climate, our soils, this kind of thing. They require basically no inputs, like fertilizers, pesticides, all this kind of thing, because again, they're adapted to live here. Once they're established, and even drought tolerant species previous to being leading up to being established. They really don't need water. And especially if you live on southeastern Vancouver Island, like historically, a lot of this would have been oak meadows, like open savannas and this kind of thing. And so, if we are able to plant those species, they're going to do well in our yards. And then also, there's the bonus effect of, these are species that not everybody has right now. They're very uncommon, and they're beautiful. And a lot of our pollinators, for example, have very specific relationships with them. When we think about things like our specialist bees. Specialist bees specialize on very specific plants or closely related plants, and that's the only thing they will eat. That's the only thing, only the resources. They will only collect resources from those species. And so if we want those bees, then we have to plant those plants. If we don't have those plants, we don't have those bees. So um, yeah, we also have generalist bees, and so they will take advantage of kind of available resources. But if we plant what the specialist bees need, then we kind of cover all the bees. So
That's so cool. And I know that's so important. I know it's one of my favorite parts of having a garden in general is just to watch how nature interacts with the plants, whether it's hummingbirds, whether it's bees, they're just so special. I think when we were chatting, you mentioned you might have some really cool slides and some photos to show us. Is that kind of around now when it would be a good time to share that?
yeah, no, this is perfect timing. Actually, I'm gonna share my screen.
I'm
So
super excited to see it. I always like to know, like, what are you doing? And I didn't even realize there was such an in-depth role in what you do. It's super cool. We can see which plants are actually native to Vancouver Island.
yeah, are you guys seeing this? And is it the
We're,
whole?
we are
We're
getting
seeing your organizing screen, not the main one. We're seeing,
Interesting. Okay.
You might be able to click on these buttons right over here. The main button, like there might be a main
do
button,
you have two screens going? You might just have to select which screen.
or you might have to use
This,
slideshow up top here.
I have,
Keep going over to the right. You see that one there?
upper area, there's end show, tip swap displays, use slideshow. Upper left
I have like a
side.
bar covering it. So what I might do is I actually have two screens connected, so I'm just gonna unplug that and hope that works.
The plants look pretty cool. I love how the pictures have like bees on them and other things.
Yeah. I don't know if this is. Let's try from the start. There we go.
Yes, perfect.
Nice job. Nice
The
job, Hunter.
winner's away. Okay, so yeah, native plants of Vancouver Island. This is just a little sneak peek because so often when we think about native plants, we just kind of think about what's in our local parks, and there might be also beautiful plants in there, but there's a very common set of shrubs and trees typically that are planted, and they are native plants, but they might not be so captivating. But like I mentioned, a large part of southeastern Vancouver Island would have been like now it is endangered oak savanna. And so within these ecosystems, we have a lot of really cool looking plants. So on the left there, that is woodland star, um, common species that's found in these places. On the right, that is in Nanaimo. So the pink little globular plants, those are sea blush. Um, it's very beautiful. A lot of pollinators really go absolutely crazy for that plant. The yellow is yellow monkey flower, and they produce like each little pod so many seeds. So that's another bonus added effect is when you plant these plants, they continuously self seed, but in the way that we like. These are the plants that we want them to be doing that. And then you can just kind of barely see it, but on the very top, there's like another band of color, blue. Those are common camas, so Camassia quamash. And yeah, it's a keystone species, so it's one of the best things you can plant around here. Here's a little macro shot of a bee in like just going crazy for the sea blush. So that's a little tiny flower on one of those pink globular species. This is Alaskan saxifrage. The flower itself is probably about the size of a dime, but when you have hundreds or thousands of them all together, it's quite beautiful. And then kind of this close-up shot gives you an appreciation for just how complex some of these species are. We have orange honeysuckle on the left, so that would be, for example, a good alternative for English ivy. It's also a vine. And on the right, we have sunderflocks. So this is just a itty bitty tiny one. But again, it's one of those ones where if you have a lot growing all together, it actually almost starts to border on shrub. Yeah, it's quite beautiful. So this is, at my grandma's house, I gave her a lot of seeds, and doesn't matter if you have a yard or not. If you just have a little porch, you can also put them in that pot or in a pot like this. So if you look really closely, there's little blue flowers. Those are small flowered blue-eyed Marys. Really important for thatching ants. On the right, again, another photo of a bee pollinator using sea blush. So this is common camas again. And then the yellow ones below that is spring gold. So it is a native lomadium species. On the left, that is a few flowered shooting star and a little crab spider hanging out on it. And then on the right, yeah, this is in a local park, but it gives you an example. Like all of these species could be in your yard. So the more turquoise colored succulent, that is broadleaf stonecrop. Some of them in this photo on the very bottom left are just about to turn yellow and start to bloom. It is one that it is in bloom right now. It's beautiful. Some more sea blush there. The scraggly looking oak, it's probably hundreds of years old because this is right by the ocean. But that is a tree that you could have in your yard. It's very slow growing, but it's quite nice. And because it's so slow growing, when you plant it in your yard, the time it's 30 years old, it's still a relatively small tree. So it's kind of perfect for urban areas. And then there are small flowered alum roots kind of wedging themselves in the crevice of this rock too. We have fawn lilies on the left. And so that is one that is seen more in the early spring. It emerges before all the leaves on all the shrubs and trees do. And on the right, that is bare stem biscuit root. It tastes literally so amazing. So a lot of these native plants you can also eat too. That's kind of another bonus added incentivization to plant them. But
we should have paired you with a herbalist on this call. Then we could have figured out which ones were edible. Unless you know. And what would you use for them? You make them into tea, or do you put them on salads, or?
I will just occasionally eat like a leaf or something like this. It's important to know that it's a very culturally important plant. And so like the roots, you can do a lot of things with that, but it's best to just leave them there unless it's in your yard and you've planted it. That would be probably a great opportunity to do something like that. But yeah, a lot of these plants, like all these photos, are from endangered ecosystems. And so it's really important to kind of like a lot of these species, they're not endangered themselves, but the ecosystem in which they found is. And a lot of the areas where our houses are on South and Southeastern Vancouver Island is where they used to be found. So yeah, chances are they're going to do really well in your yard if you plant them there.
Very, very cool. I didn't even think, I should have thought, I didn't even think that certain ones would be edible, because I know that in other cultures, and I know, like, for example, nettle here, people make tea with it. There's so many other things. I know that the nature on Vancouver Island is filled with so many incredible plants that have health remedies, that have other things, So I know, like, mushrooms. I always get so excited when someone finds chanterelles or something like that, or oyster mushrooms. I just always find that so incredible that we live in a place that's so plenty,
No,
So
exactly. There is an incredible abundance of just life, just beautiful life, and it could be on our properties. This is also camas. So camas refers to two different species around here. So that there's common camas and Camassia quamash, and then there's great camas, which is what you're looking at here. The previous slides were common camas. This is Camassia lectilinii, and generally it's a bit bigger. The petals and the flowers are symmetrical, radially symmetrical, and yeah, this is like kind of what we were just talking about. This is like the original potato. So the bulb of this plant would have been traded all up and down the coast and into the interior. It's a very important plant for biodiversity, for culture. It's again like probably one of the best things that you could have in your yard. It hits all the boxes, and it's stunning. Yeah.
So tell us again, is that the Comacamas?
So
Or
this is great camas. I sometimes say tur camas by accident, but it's great camas. And yeah, it is one of the best things that you could plant in your yard. It is From seed, it's slow. It is slow growing, but you can often buy the bulbs from nurseries, which will then speed up that process. So, for example, from seed, it takes 5 to 6 years to produce a flower. So it's
And
quite
from bulb, just one
from
season?
from bulb. It depends on the age of the bulb, but if you
Yeah.
buy a 5-year-old bulb, chances are, yeah, it will bloom. So yeah,
That might like pass perfectly into, oh, we got a few more pictures. So cool
yeah,
pictures.
I can whisk through them, but
Sweet. Yeah, I was gonna say, tell us where we get these. You know,
yeah,
like I'm on the edge of my seat, Hunter. I want to know, where do I go out
yeah.
and go shopping and find these plants and restore, connect nature again, feed the bees.
Right. Yeah, so one of the challenges with native plants, just because historically there hasn't been as high of a demand as there is now, it's definitely building, is just getting the plants, and not only getting the plants, but species that and individuals that are genetically local to your area. So if you live all the way up in Camp River, it's like you can plant native species from native plant nurseries all the way down in Victoria, but again, kind of like two different worlds here. You'd be better off to plant native species that are found more generally in the Campbell River area, or if you're down in Victoria, the Victoria area. Um,
Is that due
yes,
to climate or moisture or soil types?
yeah, like Victoria is like much more dry, much more
Okay.
dry, and yeah, there's very few oak meadow kind of habitats left in Campbell River. Historically, there would have been a lot more, but yeah, it just it's kind of like different, completely different worlds. And then also genetics, yeah. So they'll be genetically adapted to that climate, and so of course, the Campbell River Victoria being quite drastically different. Um, yeah, so this is an example though of what we're doing at Kiki Nursery. So a lot of the plants that because we're brand new, a lot of the plants that we're growing this year, so all of these on the right, were put into our own land. And so we're simultaneously restoring our own land, and then in the future, we're going to be using the seeds and bulbs and this kind of thing from those plants to then, help fill in this gap in the market. So yeah, these were grown from seed. This is yellow monkey flower. And so from seed within 1 year, this is what they look like. And yeah, they are very happy. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. And the pink one on the left, what's that one? That's so pretty. It looks like a rose, a wild
Yes.
rose.
Yeah. So we have countless, well, maybe not countless, but we have Nootka rose, bald hip rose, clustered rose, these kind of things. Nootka rose is all over Kiki Nursery, so we are going to be collecting a lot of the hips, and so that way we'll be able to grow that and have it available. Um, that's a close up of the small flower blue-eyed Mary. That's the stone crop that I was talking about in bloom. This is Menzies larkspur, so quite a deep purple, and it's in full bloom right now. Another image of combination of plants on the left. On the right, we have chocolate lily. It's quite uncommon to see them in that abundance in 2024. You will usually find just a few by themselves, so that is definitely unnatural, but it's very beautiful. Woolly sunflower on the left. So yeah, I planted some from seed at Kiki Nursery and also my parents' backyard, and it is blooming right now. We have our native chickweed on the right.
So you can have my yard and take it over anytime you want, Hunter. Just come and you can use it as your test site. You name it. I'll just give you empty garden beds. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I have only 2 or 3 slides left here, but this is on the left. That's what my front yard looks like.
Aw.
And it's been amazing to watch. So there's kind of all the images I showed you. There's the species that emerge in the spring, and then maybe later spring, and then early summer, and then summer. And so within the same area on your yard, you get multiple shows and displays of these beautiful species. Whereas I guess more traditional plantings would just be a rhodo that's planted, it blooms once, provides probably very little ecological benefit, and then that's it. And then it's there, it's beautiful, but it's maybe not blooming. This kind of thing.
That's
On the
so
right,
cool. I
right?
love when a garden kind of goes through, like, I think that's one of my favorite parts about spring. It's like one color here. It's like daffodils, tulips. I know those aren't native. And then in conjunction to all the native things. And then it's like somewhere at some point the spring, everything comes up. So yeah.
Exactly. This is a restoration site on the right. So that was just non-native introduced grass before, and now it's, kind of bursting with life. Um, this is at the Nanaimo airport. And so this was done by Satin Flower Nurseries. But just
Wow.
incredible, right? And every time I go there, it looks different. And it's, there's pollinators everywhere. It's just incredibly beautiful. I think that's it actually for my slides. So I'm
Thank
gonna
you for sharing that. That is so cool. Before we wrap things up, we have a great question in our whole series of questions about what is the municipalities, if you happen to know, do they have any, like, do they deal with things along their roadways or in their right of ways, or is it just volunteers such as broom busters? Like, how are we keeping these invasive species under control?
Yeah, so volunteerism is kind of the backbone of keeping invasive species in check in the province. Most popular parks, we'll say, and even the not popular ones, are parks in community neighborhoods. They have like a stewardship group taking care of them. And often they will work hand in hand with the city. The city often will provide resources and tools and this kind of thing. It's quite challenging to manage invasive species effectively without a large number of people all chipping in. And it can be quite overwhelming. But again, it kind of ties back to, if everybody kept their area tidy, then it'd be much easier. And so again, like allowing yourself not to be overwhelmed by all the invasive species, but just doing what you can and keeping your own yard in check is really, yeah, that's huge, right? That's huge.
Are there
Um,
any groups that someone can be involved in, like any groups off the top of your head, or any Facebook pages they can follow?
Yeah. So it kind of depends on where you are, but there's the Nanaimo Area Land Trust. They have volunteer events. The city of Nanaimo also has volunteer events. There's Friends of Shelley Creek, Friends of Uplands Park. Um, there's the people in Bowker Creek. I can't remember if it's Bowker Creek Society or Friends of Bowker Creek, but that's down in Victoria. There's the Somenos Marsh Wildlife Society. There's GORT, the Garry Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team. There's wherever you live, there's a volunteer group there's an environmental group that's doing something that you could be a part of if you choose to.
That's so awesome. I don't know if we've touched on how do we dispose of broom, or how do we dispose of these invasive species once we've, removed them? What is your best suggestion, I know you
Right.
said we have to bag them up. Is that correct at some of the municipal dumps?
Yeah. So broom has been a challenge recently to dispose of, at least in high amount or quantities. Um, yeah, so there was, because of the seeds, it becomes a management issue, right? Especially with the dump, there's always things coming and going, and so yeah, they asked recently. I don't know what the exact update is right now, because I know there was a little bit of a push back against that, but they required it to be bagged. So the best piece of advice I have is to check with your um, disposal facility near you before going, and so that way you're not wasting your time. You can just be like, hey, are there any restrictions or um, things I should be aware of before I come in? I have whatever species you're bringing. At Kiki Nursery, it all depends though on how you want to approach it. If you have, let's say, a more rural property, or an area on your property that you're okay with just designated as like that's going to be a compost pile, you could just pile the broom in an undesirable location. It will probably scar the land underneath because it has toxic oils that leach out. So it's important that if you have something underneath of that's of value, maybe don't put it there. And when I say compost, I mean compost on your own land, not in a compost bin that will be leaving your property and going elsewhere, like your community compost bin that gets picked up on a weekly basis. Invasive plants should never go in the compost. If anything, it should be bagged and put in the garbage. So a lot of, maybe not Scotch broom, but smaller weeds. Like if you have a little bit of ivy on your property, you could put that into a garbage bag and just put that in the normal garbage. Kiki Nursery, we burn Scotch broom, so we are a farmland, and so that's something we're able to do. There are restrictions with that we have to follow as well. But yeah, that's one way that you can get rid of it. Again, it's all about where you live and what you want to do. But for most people, you're probably going to have to bring it to a disposal facility.
That's awesome. We've had some great questions. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to either turn off your mic or put those questions in. We're kind of nearing the end of our chat with Hunter, so I'm sure you want to go have some dinner, because I think you just let us know you like pulled in 5 or 10 minutes before the conversation. So I'm sure your belly's growling after a hard day at work. But if you have any questions, we would love to have you take advantage of Hunter's knowledge and expertise. And we're so grateful for your time, Hunter. We know you have a busy schedule, and we're thrilled that you were able to take this time and share it with us. And we're also
Laura,
yeah.
I actually have a question for you from a real estate standpoint, and invasives on the property. Like how does it impact, for example, a sale?
It's very interesting because it depends on if the buyer is even aware of what an invasive species is. Some people, it's their first home. They don't know anything about gardening. They may not be concerned about it. Sometimes they just call it BC natural, such as blackberries. And then other buyers are very concerned about it and won't buy properties that have invasive species. I've heard from Denise multiple times that she's had clients that have basically just said, nope, can't never get rid of this, not interested, writing it off, want my yard to be absolutely fantastic. So there's no direct correlation between like value, but there is sometimes a correlation between, if the two properties are very similar, one has invasive species and the other doesn't, they might lean towards the property that doesn't have invasive species.
So there is a bit of incentive there to also keep things under control.
Yeah, I would say so. And because, your properties are going to show better. We know curb appeal. We know, the people fall in love with those properties, have those wow effects, I know Megan was showing a rural property, and she was showing that types of grass grow in wet lands. And there's so many little kind of insider tricks that we don't know. So I'm sure when it comes to invasive species, probably certain things that grow in certain soils better than others, right? So, I know when we see willows, we go, oh, water table must be high here. Interesting, So there's lots to know about, and unfortunately, we don't get taught a lot in real estate. There's no section in our course or in our continued learning about, hey, this is what you need to know about invasive species. But Crystal, thank you so much for putting Hunter's email in our chat, because
Is that the right one actually? Because I think I typed it wrong. It wouldn't be gmail.ca, right? Gmail.com.
Yeah, I originally put it in with the Gmail, and it's just
.ca. Okay, there we go.
Awesome. Yeah, so if anyone's on the call and they're interested in having more knowledge from Hunter, please reach out to him directly. And coming up next month, we're pretty excited to talk about drainage and septic systems. So an ideal topic for any clients on rural properties. And, you just don't know, because today I had a conversation with the city of Nanaimo, who informed me that there are still numerous properties right in the city that are still connected because they were never converted over to septic. And some of those are right in North Nanaimo. So I was quite intrigued to figure that out. The septic runs outside the street, and it's right, and the home is just not connected to it because their septics have continued to work. So Hunter, thank you so much. We value your time, your knowledge, and we are so thrilled to have been able to spend the last hour with you. So on closing, we are so grateful, and we look forward to continuing to follow you on Instagram and learning more. And I am serious. If you want to replant my back garden, just give me a call.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Hunter.